Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract, in the house today. Mike Downie. Let me give you a bit of an overview on Mike and get into what we want to talk about today, which is no dress rehearsal and the leadership that goes around it. So Mike's a writer, director, producer of numerous documentaries, and he's the co-founder of the Gord Downie and Shawnee Wenjack Fund. Credits include things like The Hockey Nomad, Invasion of the Brain Snatchers, Finding the Secret Path. One of my favorites is COVID Cruise. Do check that out. And the latest film called The Tragically Hip No Dress Rehearsal. Now, No Dress Rehearsal is the definitive four-part documentary series about a bunch of scrappy kids from Kingston, Ontario, Canada, made up of Gord Downie, Rob Baker, Johnny Fay, Paul Langlois, and Gord Sinclair, who went on to make music as the Tragically Hip, aka The Hip, that defined Canada to the world and, more importantly, Canada to Canadians. And for those that may not know, yes, Mike is a sibling to the band's lead singer, Gord Downie. Throughout the documentary, Mike interweaves never before seen archival footage, including new interviews with the band, family, friends, famous fans, including the likes of Will Arnett, Dan Aykroyd, Sarah Harmer, Geddy Lee, and even Canada's current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Mike, you've pushed the usual platitudes of a rock doc by exposing sentiments that perhaps others would not have got to. So tell us a bit about No Dress Rehearsal and how you were able to, over the past 2-3 years or so, it seems, gather footage and put it into something that's really going to mean a lot to a lot of people out there.
Well, thanks for that, Dan. With a legacy doc, it really is, it's all about the strength of the archive. You've either got it, you're either talking about stories or you're recreating stories and you're taking the viewer right into the room. So that's not a news flash, but we did spend, I would say pretty much I started talking to the band about making this documentary in 2020. Jake Gold, their longtime manager, was back in the fold. He was their manager for 17 years. Then he was out in the wilderness on Canadian Idol and different things for 17 years. And then he was back in 2020, and we talked shortly after he got his gig back about doing a definitive documentary. And he went to the band, and uh, they were into it, and they agreed to let me give it a whack. So almost instantly, I started kind of gathering in what I knew of in terms of archive. Really, really important. It helped that I had some of my own archive actually. I had 75 hours of another roadside attraction tour for the film that we made, Hexenkettle, in 1993. But I knew who all the different filmmakers were who had their moment. I kind of like to think of like the baton being passed from, people making music videos about the band, a few documentaries, but kind of everything in between. And there was a lot of us that had a different, sort of moment of documenting the band. And I kind of knew who most of those people were. So I put that call out and just started to gather as much as I could. And we got a lot. And so if you take the archive, which is hundreds of hours, and then I probably interviewed 65. I think I had up 65 people that I interviewed, maybe 65 interviews, because I did the band members like 3 or 4 days, like full days, three or
Mm-hmm.
four times, like separated over time, which is a really good idea, by the way. And but you put all that together, and that's a lot. I mean, documentary filmmaking, you always want a lot. You need a lot of media. You need a lot of assets, the stills, everything else. And then they have to get really, really organized with it, obviously. But I had this kind of visual of, with this much archive, most I've ever had to deal with, you're either surfing on that wave, or that wave is about to crush you, and there's nothing really in between. So we did I think, a really good job. The band was also going through a stage where they had a company who was taking all of everything that they had personally and in storage collectively, and capturing it, photographing it, and creating a super database which was searchable. So all sorts of little things, but significant little things like posters and set lists and things like that. Stuff that would, for a filmmaker, like we're pretty used to visual media. So the ephemera and things like that would have been a little bit, I think, a little bit overwhelming. But the band was doing that on their own anyway, and we had access to that. So, yeah, not to get too deep into the nuts and bolts, but yeah, there was there was a lot of nuts and bolts. We're like, here's the car, and it's broken down into all its elemental pieces, put it together. So, but yeah, it was great time to, be, you know, thinking about the potential for it. I'm a big planner. So I always do pretty deep shooting scripts. Like they read like a script, like you would for a scripted film. Like they really are very specific. Who's going to say what? And a lot of it, some of it's guesswork, but you put it all down, in script form, and it really shows you your film before you shoot a frame. So, that was a big part of the early stage of, you're wondering about the archive and stuff. So these are the kind of things going on as you're getting ready to go into this. And I am very grateful for every minute. And they were not minutes, they were measured in weeks of planning that we did. So, yeah.
Well, you're in a very unique situation, somewhat obviously being the sibling and older brother to one of the band members. Now, curiously, given you grew up with your brother in the sense that you saw what was happening with him in terms of the band forming, over the archival footage over the 4 years, and thus then looking at back 40 years of this band, what did you learn about the band that surprised you, knowing that yes, you had a relationship with one of the band members, but you also had four other relationships, assumingly with the other four and Jake and so forth. But there must have been some surprise moments for you.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest ones, and it's for, I think, everyone who has seen the first episode, is this earlier member of the band, Davis Manning, who was in the band from 1984 to 1986. And as Steve Jordan in the film says, nobody really knew much about him or even where he came from. Well, as it turns out, he was, he was from he was 10, 12 years older than everybody else in the band, but he's American. He grew up born in Nevada, grew up in the Northwest and ended up in San Francisco. But he was in the Navy in 1969, and he was set to go to Vietnam, and he escaped, was caught, was put into military prison for a time, and managed to get, I guess, served his time, and went back with the Navy, and then had another opportunity to get out of town, and he did. And through the anti-war movement, they got him all the way to Washington State, and they got him across the border into Canada, and he stayed in Canada till the amnesty was announced in 1977. So, here's this Canadian band, all these guys, high school friends. This is before Paul Langlois, who joins the band, who's high school friend from Kingston. But here's this early chapter where it's not just, oh yeah, he didn't go to KCV. Oh yeah, he's not from Kingston. Oh yeah, no, he's not Canadian. Oh no, he's American. Oh no, he's not a draft dodger. He's a draft deserter. And that was Davis Manning. So that, like, and everybody in Kingston knew who this guy was, but nobody knew anything about him. And as it turns out, the reason is because Davis had come to Canada, and you didn't go around as a draft deserter. Even after the amnesty, you didn't go around saying, oh, I escaped the Vietnam War or going to the Vietnam War. So that one was the deeper I got into that, I'm like, this is a film onto itself. And then, I think in some ways I was probably, I didn't realize that, Gord Sinclair came up with the riff for Fiddler's Green, which is a song that Gord wrote about our nephew, Charles Gillespie, who died tragically at 3 from congenital heart defect after his first major operation. Gord Sinclair's brother had died in grade 9 at a high school dance at KCBI from a congenital heart defect.
Mm.
And I only knew that story of Fiddler's Green from the Downie side. I knew about Colin Sinclair, Gord's younger brother, but I did not know that that he had written that little Celtic kind of lilt that is 38 years old, and so that kind of got me pretty good. Like,
Mm.
just that idea of, I knew those guys were, they were really brothers, Dan. They were really, they came up together, they stuck it out together, they tested each other's patience, they drove each other crazy, they did all those things as brothers and sisters can and will do. But I didn't know the depths of the relationship between Gord and Gord Downie, Gord Sinclair, when it came to that song, and what a gift that song is
Mm.
to the world. I mean, that is in the documentary, as Robbie Baker says, it's a lullaby for grieving parents, which I think kind of pretty much sums that up.
Well, there's not a September 17 that goes by. I don't think of that. That's for sure.
Mhm.
With 40 years with the band together, there were, like any band of brothers or relationship, there's ups and there's downs, there's swings, there's shifts, there's relationship fetterings, there's things that go right, and there's creatively things that go wrong. And so within your discovery and the process there, were there any aha moments as well where you're like, wow, I didn't know it got to that depth, which it could have been really, really awesome, and they were so ecstatic about their creativity, or maybe not so awesome given there was perhaps some repairing to do in certain situations?
Well, I mean, I just seen the doc. They had a lot of in their, second half of their career, so the 2000s on. Yeah, they had a lot of Gord going solo. There were a lot of things that kind of tested their relationship, and they got on each other's nerves, and they had trouble agreeing on things, and they hurt each other's feelings. But when you think about a relationship, any relationship that gets to the 35-year mark, I mean, we're well past that now, but Gord's not with us. So, but if we think about that 35 years, you'd be pretty hard pressed to come up with a relationship that is not going to, sort of expand and contract, in terms of the level of trust and the level of love, if you will. But and they definitely went through that. And as much as this doc does get into the tensions that develop within the band, and what they were a result of, like where they came from, and how they manifested. In many ways, I think of this 4-part series as really kind of, it's a bit, it's a bit Jungian in a way. There's this early phase, which is the first 2 episodes, and into the third, which is just the youthful exuberance. It's about chasing the dream, and it's about, being 5 guys in a van, and then a tour bus. But it's really about just like conquering, and it's really about the 5 musketeers, as you would
Mm.
expect. Life's not too complicated. I'm plenty of things come up, but they're all in this early stage of life. They're in their teens, and then they're in their 20s. And then where it turns is adulthood. They at a certain point, probably married and having their first kids. Nothing is quite as simple as it used to be. And it'll never be quite as simple as it was ever again, which doesn't mean that it won't be as gratifying or as fun as it was in that first phase, but it'll be more complicated. It's just never going to have that simplicity again of 5 of us right on the same, like finishing each other's sentences, basically. And I think that when you watch it, you could either be like and I think people who followed the band who had no idea, which is just about 99.9%, had no idea about these kind of the internal strife that was happening within the band, and it was deep. And there were times when there was questions about this band carrying on, without breaking up, which would have been terrible. But
Yeah.
bands are kind of built to break up at some point, Dan. So, but I think if, while you're watching it, you also can sort of meditate a little bit on that idea of like, this is a universal experience. We we have these lives that have this early liftoff stage, and it's pretty exciting and it's pretty great, and the relationships and all of that. And then at a certain point, you get to a stage where you're just thinking like, what the hell happened, man? It used to be so easy just to get together and have some fun, and like, so I do think that the documentary does a good job of putting these things forward, but not in never in a sort of gossipy or salacious way, but really in a kind of like that takes you a little bit further to understand that these artists who are trying to make something really great every 2 years with no blueprint, like you do a great record like fully completely, and every like me wants them to make fully completely part two, like, because it's so amazing. What do? You don't do that. You do day for night, which is like, I didn't get it for a couple of months. And then the penny drops and you go, okay, I see what you're doing. So what I'm trying to describe is like the artistic process that is without a safety net, and certainly without, a drawing about how this is going to work. Well, again, these are the kind of things that, would build up over time, because you're making a lot of decisions. You're just making a lot of decisions that affect everything. And you're not going to agree, and you're going to win those arguments, and you're going to lose those arguments. All 5 of them had the veto. So that creates this sort of democracy, but is it a true democracy when some people's votes maybe aren't quite the same? Like,
right.
These are the things that add up. And so what do? Well, in their case, they soldiered on. Amazingly, they had a major reconciliation before Gord got ill diagnosed in 2015, but not much before that. Was this sort of kind of which again, I would suggest comes probably with age, because what happens is Geddy Lee says the middle years are the hardest. And what he says about it is because you have so much confidence in your own ideas. You have so much confidence in your own ideas. You're not quite old enough yet to understand or to accept that, this partnership requires you to come with these ideas, but it also requires you to come and be ready to receive these other ideas. And that's kind of, I'm talking about the ego. And I think with some age comes that perspective, but it also comes, I think the ego just starts to just kind of, I just think it kind of dims a little bit. It doesn't quite have the same power over you and being reactive to things like that. And I think that was sort of naturally, I think it was naturally happening to the band. And they were coming into the next phase, which I've seen it with other artists, which is kind of the gratitude phase. We're still here. We're still doing this. Before it's just balls to the wall and we're going forward. And then there's this, middle phase, and you're still doing that. Maybe not everyone's quite as on board, and you're not the shiny new toy anymore. So that's got its kind of complications. And if you can get through that, then there's this maybe other phase, which they didn't get to spend a lot of time there, which I think is kind of the gratitude sort of phase, where I think we've all, people our age, working, doing what you love, at some time in your life, you're like, I don't think I get the respect that I deserve. And I don't think they realize. And you kind of go through that for a little while. And then if you're lucky, you kind of come out the other side and you kind of go, geez, I love doing this. I'm so lucky to be in this situation. And that's gratitude. That's gratitude. So
we're tight on time. Just one quick one. Gord Downie wrote in Introduce Yourself, a song about the band, called Love Over Money. And what resonated for me in thinking about the documentary is that that's actually that resilience and that gratitude systemic from, day one through to, August 20th, 2016, their last concert together. Did you feel that in the footage? Did you feel that putting that together, that resilience of love and gratitude over money?
I do. I do. I mean, um, on a few levels, and one is literally love over money. They left a lot of money on the table. They did because they believed in a certain, they had some rules and about, you name it, corporate sponsorship, and they really, they wanted the audience to trust what they were doing. They wanted them to trust them and not to feel like they were, just there to be, you know, uh, to sell records to and to buy concert tickets from. And then I think, the love of that they had for each other, that I think kind of was very much there, and then obviously wasn't so obvious. But I go back to brotherhood, and the brotherhood that they had, and I think the patience that they had, ultimately. Sometimes I think we always want to sort of kind of direct where we're going, which makes perfect sense. But in a collective, sometimes you just gotta wait for it to come around a little bit. You gotta keep doing the good work, which they did. And I'll tell you this too, Dan. So let me just say that if we look at those middle years we were talking about, and the records they put out then, and I know the catalog, their catalog very, very well. We go back to those middle years with that strife that we see in the documentary, with a audience that isn't as engaged as they were before. Some of them are just getting a little older and distracted and stuff. But moving on, and file sharing. So the economics around them are they're just changing like literally overnight. And if you go back to that period with all these things happening, none of them good for the overall creative process or just the music. You will find on every one of those records 3 or 4 gems, songs that you will stop what you're doing, put down whatever it is, and just take it in for a moment. That's incredible. That's incredible. And I think, that's life, as a parent, as a filmmaker, like it's rarely smooth. You know what I mean? Like it's not supposed to be. And you're supposed to be tested. And you're, in that test, the problem is nobody's told you you're being tested, and you just are feeling that the way it is. And I can't believe all these things are lining up, to create this barrier and all these things. It's like, that's the thing. That's the test. And the trick is they don't tell you when you're being tested, and the band was being tested. And what did they do? They stuck with it, and they stuck to their art, and they stuck to their, authenticity, and they stuck to their beliefs. And, sometimes they, wanted to throw each other out the window, but, so they got there. Dan, if you got another question, go right ahead. Like I got 5 minutes for sure, man.
Okay, well, I wanted to.
Are you getting what you need?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I wanted, thankfully, if we have a little bit more time here, I do want to come back to your co-founding of the Gord Downie and Shawnee Wenjack Fund, and the activism on the Indigenous causes, because the hip, Gord, all the band members, they believed in things other than just making money and the band and the music. So whether that was Bullfrog Power back in the day, right? Whether it was for Waterkeepers and Mark Mattson and team, there's always been something about the hip whom believed in a social purpose. And I wanted to touch on that and end with that basically, and ask you what you saw over the time as a brother and as a friend to the band, but also just in the documentary and what you found in the footage.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The band was really from the early days. I forget the last show that they did in Kingston where they actually took a paycheck, but let me say it was either it was either the Manor or it was Alfie's Pub at Queens.
All right.
As soon as they got established, they felt like they could not take a dime out of Kingston. And they were just, I mean, they were early days. They were not rolling in money, but it was just sort of something that they just felt, you know what? This is the place that has nurtured us. Like this is the place that built us. And so that was an early decision.
Hmm.
And I feel like they clearly got so much out of that, that um, they got so much out of that community and understood, I guess, that that community wasn't just built so it could be a launch pad for the Tragically Hip. The community is there to support people in all sorts of ways. I think often invisibly.
Hmm.
So what do you do? Well, as soon as you get the chance, as soon as you get on a bit of firm ground, what can you do to sort of help that thing live and breathe, whatever that is. And you see it, Trillium Camp,
Yeah.
the ones you mentioned, and Waterkeepers for Gord, the Kingston Nurses Association, like, um, I think they also probably had a little bit of, now that I think about it, you know, they probably had a little bit of not guilt, but they were aware that what they were doing up on stage gets a lot of attention
Hmm.
and a lot of love, and we really sort of overpraise that. And yet it is the nurses or the camp counselors who have kids showing up every summer who have cancer, who don't know if they will be back the next year because they may not be around. And I think they probably had a little sense of that. We get a lot of credit for doing what we love, for playing instruments and writing songs and making a living out of our imagination. And I think they understood that they needed to find a way to, put some air into the sails of these other organizations that really do change people's lives, that really make that kind of difference. And they did that from a very young age, and I think it speaks to these five guys come from very strong families. They in the documentary they praise their parents. Like we have more content about the parents of these five guys than I'm going to ask a researcher to go through the whole the whole library of rock documentaries and see if we can find one that profiles the parents of the rock stars the way that we do it. And there's a reason we do it, because that's what these guys believe. They believe that they were there because of the love and support from their families, from their parents, and that's where it all started for them. So yeah, really strong themes. And it's one thing to say it's about family, but here's my observation, Dan, to kind of wrap up, which is, in this story, we start off with these five brothers, and then we learn about their 10 parents and the families that are sort of united in the
Hmm.
belief that these guys should be following this questionable career choice, and so it is about their family. And then the way that they worked was anybody who ever worked with the band became part of that family. They worked with the same people, many of them for 30 years, 30 or more years. So then the family kind of expanded to that. And then they had such a relationship with their fans and people like you that really connected with what they were doing. And they never did anything to break that trust. They went out of their way, and we, as we talked about, they left money on the table, love over money. And so they built up this sort of, the next concentric ring in our family here. And then on August 20th, 2016, that family included half the country. And we literally held hands and we cried for the band and for Gord that this was coming to an end. and we cried for ourselves because a part of us that had really connected with this was not going to be nurtured any further. It was going to come to an end. And that's a big family. That's a big family, you know. I felt my brother Patrick, our whole family felt, you know, the whole country grieving along with us when Gordy passed. It was unmistakable. Like it was real, and
Mm.
it made it harder, and it made it easier, you know, at the same time. And for a while there, I really felt like we were one big family here in Canada, and it's hard to believe that that was for the love of my brother. Like I'll never be able to fully process that.
Mm.
I swear I don't think I'll ever be able to fully process what that was.
You've been gracious with your time. I was there in Kingston on the 20th of August in 2016. And as Robbie said, vicariously through another friend, the band landed the balloon, but I think it was a balloon of love. And to use another of the band's song lyrics and titles, I think it was a family band. And they just taught us how to be love over money.
Well done, Dan.
Everyone, you've been listening to or watching Mike Downie. He's an incredible human being, writer, director, producer of all sorts of things. Please also watch COVID Cruise. It's an incredible film. But this talk today, we've been chatting about obviously the Tragically Hip, No Dress Rehearsal. Tell us when it comes out and where, Mike.
So it's available on Prime Video, and it's coming out on September 20th worldwide. So very excited.
Aren't we all? Thank you for this. And again, really appreciate the insights, your humbleness, and your generosity. I think we all will look forward to repeat watches of No Dress Rehearsal.
It was great talking with you again, Dan. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract, with Mike Downie in the house. Cheers, all.